A Child's Dream of a Star by Charles Dickens. Read for you by Senovia Han. There once was a child, and he strolled about a good deal, and thought of a number of things. He had a sister, who was a child too, and his constant companion. These two used to wonder all day long. They wondered at the beauty of the flowers. They wondered at the height and blueness of the sky. They wondered at the depth of the bright water. They wondered at the goodness and the power of God, who made the lovely world. They used to say to one another sometimes, "Supposing all the children upon earth were to die, would the flowers and the water and the sky be sorry?" They believed they would be sorry. For, they say, the buds are the children of the flowers, and the little playful streams that gambol down the hillsides are the children of the water, and the smallest bright specks playing at hide-and-seek in the sky all night must surely be the children of the stars. And they would all be grieved to see their playmates, the children of men, no more. There was one clear shining star that used to come out in the sky before the rest, near the church spire, above the graves. It was larger and more beautiful, they thought, than all the others, and every night they watched for it, standing hand in hand at a window. Whoever saw it first cried out, "I see the star!" And often they cried out both together, knowing so well when it would rise and where. So they grew to be such friends with it that, before lying down in their beds, they always looked out once again to bid it good night. And when they were turning around to sleep, they used to say, "God bless the star." But while she was still very young, oh, very, very young, the sister drooped and came to be so weak that she could no longer stand in the window at night. And then the child looked sadly out by himself, and when he saw the star, turned around and said to the patient, pale face on the bed, "I see the star." And then a smile would come upon the face, and a little weak voice used to say, "God bless my brother and the star." And so the time came, all too soon, when the child looked out alone, and when there was no face on the bed, and when there was a little grave among the graves, not there before, and when the star made long rays down towards him as he saw it through his tears. Now, these rays were so bright, and they seemed to make such a shining way from earth to heaven, that when the child went to his solitary bed, he dreamed about the star, and dreamed that, lying where he was, he saw a train of people taken up that sparkling road by angels. And the star, opening, showed him a great world of light, where many more such angels waited to receive them. All these angels who were waiting turned their beaming eyes upon the people who were carried up into the star. And some came out from the long rows in which they stood, and fell upon the people's necks, and kissed them tenderly, and went away with them down avenues of light, and were so happy in their company that, lying in his bed, he wept for joy. But there were many angels who did not go with them, and among them one he knew, the patient face that once had lain upon the bed was glorified and radiant. But his heart found out his sister among all the host. His sister's angel lingered near the entrance of the star, and said to the leader among those who had brought the people thither, "Is my brother come?" And he said, "No." She was turning hopefully away when the child stretched out his arms and cried, "Oh, sister, I am here. Take me." And then she turned her beaming eyes upon him, and it was night, and the star was shining into the room, making long rays down towards him as he saw it through his tears. From that hour forth, the child looked out upon the star as on the home he was to go to, when his time should come, and he thought that he did not belong to the earth alone, but to the star too, because of his sister's angel gone before. There was a baby born to be a brother to the child, and while he was so little that he never yet had spoken word, he stretched his tiny form out on his bed and died. Again, the child dreamed of the open star, and of the company of angels, and the train of people, and the rows of angels with their beaming eyes all turned upon those people's faces. Said his sister's angel to the leader, "Is my brother come?" And he said, "Not that one, but another." As the child beheld his brother's angel in her arms, he cried, "Oh, sister, I am here. Take me." And she turned and smiled upon him, and the star was shining. He grew to be a young man, and was busy at his books when an old servant came to him and said, "Thy mother is no more. I bring her blessing on her darling son." Again at night he saw the star and all that former company. Said his sister's angel to the leader, "Is my brother come?" And he said, "Thy mother." A mighty cry of joy went forth through all the star, because the mother was reunited to her 2 children. And he stretched out his arms and cried, "Oh, mother, sister, and brother, I am here. Take me." And they answered him, "Not yet." And the star was shining. He grew to be a man whose hair was turning gray, and he was sitting in his chair by the fireside, heavy with grief, and with his face bedewed with tears, when the star opened once again. Said his sister's angel to the leader, "Is my brother come?" And he said, "Nay, but his maiden daughter." And the man who had been the child saw his daughter, newly lost to him, a celestial creature among those three, and he said, "My daughter's head is on my sister's bosom, and her arm is around my mother's neck, and at her feet there is the baby of old time, and I can bear the parting from her. God be praised." And the star was shining. Thus the child came to be an old man, and his once smooth face was wrinkled, and his steps were slow and feeble, and his back was bent. And one night as he lay upon his bed, his children standing round, he cried, as he had cried so long ago, "I see the star." They whispered one another, "He is dying." And he said, "I am. My age is falling from me like a garment, and I move towards the star as a child. And oh, my Father, now I thank thee that it has so often opened to receive those dear ones who await me." And the star was shining, and it shines upon his grave. The End. The Lamplighter by Charles Dickens. Read for you by Senovia Han. "If you talk of Murphy and Francis Moore, gentlemen," said the lamplighter who was in the chair, "I mean to say that neither of 'em ever had any more to do with the stars than Tom Grid had." "And what had he to do with them?" asked the lamplighter who officiated as vice. "Nothing at all," replied the other. "Just exactly nothing at all." "Do you mean to say you don't believe in Murphy, then?" demanded the lamplighter who had opened the discussion. "I mean to say I believe in Tom Grigg," replied the chairman. "Whether I believe in Murphy or not is a matter between me and my conscience, and whether Murphy believes in himself or not is a matter between him and his conscience. Gentlemen, I drink to your healths." The lamplighter, who did the company this honor, was seated in the chimney corner of a certain tavern, which has been, time out of mind, the lamplighter's house of call. He sat in the midst of a circle of lamplighters, and was the cacique, or chief of the tribe. If any of our readers have had the good fortune to behold a lamplighter's funeral, they will not be surprised to learn that lamplighters are a strange and primitive people, that they rigidly adhere to the old ceremonies and customs which have been handed down among them from father to son since the first public lamp was lighted out of doors, that they intermarry and betroth their children in infancy, that they enter into no plots or conspiracies, for who ever heard of a traitorous lamplighter? That they commit no crimes against the laws of their country, there being no instance of a murderous or burglarious lamplighter. That they are, in short, notwithstanding their apparently volatile and restless character, a highly moral and reflective people, having among themselves as many traditional observances as the Jews, and being, as a body, if not as old as the hills, at least as old as the streets. It is an article of their creed that the first faint glimmering of true civilization shone in the first street light maintained at the public expense. They trace their existence and high position in the public esteem. in a direct line to the heathen mythology, and hold that the history of Prometheus himself is but a pleasant fable, whereof the true hero is a lamplighter. Gentlemen, said the lamplighter in the chair, I drink your healths. And perhaps, sir, said the vice, holding up his glass and rising a little way off his seat and sitting down again, in token that he recognized and returned the compliment, perhaps you will add to that condescension by telling us who Tom Grigg was, and how he came to be connected in your mind with Francis Moore, physician. Hear, 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 cried the lamplighter's generally. Tom Grigg, gentlemen, said the chairman, was one of us, and it happened to him, as it don't often happen to a public character in our line, that he had his, what you may call it, cast. His head? Said the vice. No, replied the chairman, not his head. His face, perhaps? Said the vice. No, not his face. His legs? No, not his legs. Nor yet his arms, nor his hands, nor his feet, nor his chest, all of which were severally suggested. His nativity, perhaps? That's it, said the chairman, awakening from his thoughtful attitude at the suggestion. His nativity. That's what Tom had cast, gentlemen. In plaster? Asked the vice. I don't rightly know how it's done, returned the chairman, but I suppose it was. And there he stopped, as if that were all he had to say, whereupon there arose a murmur among the company, which at length resolved itself into a request, conveyed through the vice, that he would go on. This being exactly what the chairman wanted, he mused for a little time, performed that agreeable ceremony which is popularly termed wetting one's whistle, and went on thus. Tom Grigg, gentlemen, was, as I have said, one of us, and I may go further and say he was an ornament to us, and such a one as only the good old times of oil and cotton could have produced. Tom's family, gentlemen, were all lamplighters. Not the ladies, I hope? Asked the vice. They had talent enough for it, sir, rejoined the chairman, and would have been, but for the prejudices of society. Let women have their rights, sir, and the females of Tom's family would have been every one of 'em in office. But that emancipation hasn't come yet, and hadn't then, and consequently they confined themselves to the bosom of their families, cooked the dinners, mended the clothes, minded the children, comforted their husbands, and attended to the housekeeping generally. It's a hard thing upon the women, gentlemen, that they are limited to such a sphere of action as this. Very hard. I happen to know all about Tom, gentlemen, from the circumstance of his uncle by his mother's side having been my particular friend. His, that's Tom's uncle's, fate was a melancholy one. Gas was the death of him. When it was first talked of, he laughed. He wasn't angry. He laughed at the credulity of human nature. They might as well talk, he says, of laying on an everlasting succession of glowworms. And then he laughed again, partly at his joke, and partly at poor humanity. In course of time, however, the thing got ground, the experiment was made, and they lighted up Pall Mall. Tom's uncle went to see it. I've heard that he fell off his ladder 14 times that night, from weakness, and that he would certainly have gone on falling till he killed himself, if his last tumble hadn't been into a wheelbarrow which was going his way, and humanely took him home. "I foresee in this," says Tom's uncle faintly, and taking to his bed as he spoke, "I foresee in this," he says, "the breaking up of our profession. There's no more going the rounds to trim by daylight, so no more dribbling down of the oil on them hats and bonnets of ladies and gentlemen when one feels in spirits. Any low fellow can light a gas lamp, and it's all up." In this state of mind he petitioned the government for, I want a word again, gentlemen, what do you call that which they give to people when it's found out, at last, that they've never been of any use and have been paid too much for doing nothing? "Compensation?" suggested the vice. "That's it," said the chairman. "Compensation. They didn't give it to him, though, and then he got very fond of his country all at once, and went about saying that gas was a death blow to his native land, and that it was a plot of the radicals to ruin the country and destroy the oil and cotton trade forever, and that the whales would go and kill themselves privately out of sheer spite and vexation at not being caught. At last he got right down cracked, called his tobacco pipe a gas pipe, thought his tears were lamp oil, and went on with all manner of nonsense of that sort, till one night he hung himself on a lamp iron in St. Martin's Lane, and there was an end of him. Tom loved him, gentlemen, but he survived it. He shed a tear over his grave, got very drunk, spoke a funeral oration that night in the watch-house, and was fined 5 shillings for it in the morning. Some men are none the worse for this sort of thing. Tom was one of them. He went that very afternoon on a new beat, as clear in his head and as free from fever as Father Matthew himself. Tom's new beat, gentlemen, was, I can't exactly say where, for that he'd never tell, but I know it was in a quiet part of town, where there were some queer old houses. I have always had it in my head that it must have been somewhere near Canonbury Tower in Islington, but that's a matter of opinion. Wherever it was, he went upon it, with a brand-new ladder, a white hat, a brown holland jacket and trousers, a blue neckerchief, and a sprig of full-blown double-wall-flower in his buttonhole. Tom was always genteel in his appearance, and I have heard from the best judges that if he had left his ladder at home that afternoon, you might have took him for a lord. He was always merry, was Tom, and such a singer, that if there was any encouragement for native talent, he'd have been at the opera. He was on his ladder, lighting his first lamp, and singing to himself in a manner more easily to be conceived than described, when he hears the clock strike 5, and suddenly sees an old gentleman with a telescope in his hand throw up a window and look at him very hard. Tom didn't know what could be passing in this old gentleman's mind. He thought it likely enough that he might be saying within himself, "Here's a new lamplighter, a good-looking young fellow. Shall I stand something to drink?" Thinking this possible, he keeps quiet still, pretending to be very particular about the wick, and looks at the old gentleman sideways, seeming to take no notice of him. Gentlemen, he was one of the strangest and most mysterious-looking files that ever Tom clapped his eyes on. He was dressed all slovenly and untidy, in a great gown of a kind of bed-furniture pattern, with a cap of the same on his head, and a long old flapped waistcoat, with no braces, no strings, very few buttons, in short, with hardly any of those artificial contrivances that hold society together. Tom knew by these signs, and by his not being shaved, and by his not being over-clean, and by a sort of wisdom not quite awake in his face, that he was a scientific old gentleman. He often told me that if he could have conceived the possibility of the whole Royal Society being boiled down into one man, he should have said the old gentleman's body was that body. The old gentleman claps the telescope to his eye, looks all around, sees nobody else in sight, stares at Tom again, and cries out very loud, "Halloa!" "Hallo, sir," says Tom from the ladder, and "Hallo again, if you come to that." "Here's an extraordinary fulfillment," says the old gentleman, "of a prediction of the planets." "Is there?" says Tom. "I'm very glad to hear it." "Young man," says the old gentleman, "you don't know me." "Sir," says Tom, "I have not that honor, but I shall be happy to drink your health, notwithstanding." "I read," cries the old gentleman, without taking any notice of this politeness on Tom's part, "I read what's going to happen in the stars." Tom thanked him for the information, and begged to know if anything particular was going to happen in the stars, in the course of a week or so, but the old gentleman, correcting him, explained that he read in the stars what was going to happen on dry land, and that he was acquainted with all the celestial bodies. "I hope they're all well, sir," says Tom. "Everybody." "Hush," cries the old gentleman. "I have consulted the book of fate with rare and wonderful success. I am versed in the great sciences of astrology and astronomy. In my house here I have every description of apparatus for observing the course and motion of the planets. 6 months ago I derived from this source the knowledge that precisely as the clock struck 5 this afternoon, a stranger would present himself, the destined husband of my young and lovely niece, in reality of illustrious and high descent, but whose birth would be enveloped in uncertainty and mystery." "Don't tell me yours isn't," says the old gentleman, who was in such a hurry to speak that he couldn't get the words out fast enough. "For I know better." Gentlemen, Tom was so astonished when he heard him say this, that he could hardly keep his footing on the ladder, and found it necessary to hold on by the lamp-post. There was a mystery about his birth. His mother had always admitted it. Tom had never known who was his father, and some people had gone so far as to say that even she was in doubt. While he was in this state of amazement, the old gentleman leaves the window, bursts out of the house door, shakes the ladder, and Tom, like a ripe pumpkin, comes sliding down into his arms. "Let me embrace you," he says, folding his arms about him and nearly lighting up his old bed furniture gown at Tom's link. "You're a man of noble aspect. Everything combines to prove the accuracy of my observations. You have had mysterious promptings within you," he says. "I know you have had whisperings of greatness, eh?" he says. "I think I have," says Tom. Tom was one of those who can persuade themselves to anything they like. "I've often thought I wasn't the small beer I was taken for." "You were right," cries the old gentleman, hugging him again. "Come in. My niece awaits us." "Is the young lady tolerable good-looking, sir?" says Tom, hanging fire rather as he thought of her playing the piano and knowing French and being up to all manner of accomplishments. "She's beautiful," cries the old gentleman, who was in such a terrible bustle that he was all in a perspiration. "She has a graceful carriage, an exquisite shape, a sweet voice, a countenance beaming with animation and expression, and the eye," he says, rubbing his hands, "of a startled fawn." Tom supposed this might mean what was called among his circle of acquaintance a game eye, and, with a view to this defect, inquired whether the young lady had any cash. "She has 5,000 pounds, cries the old gentleman. "But what of that? What of that? A word in your ear. I'm in search of the philosopher's stone. I have very nearly found it. Not quite. It turns everything to gold. That's its property." Tom naturally thought it must have a deal of property, and said that when the old gentleman did get it, he hoped he'd be careful to keep it in the family. "Certainly," he says. "Of course. 5,000 pounds. What's 5,000 pounds to us? What's 5,000,000? He says. "What's 5,000 million? Money will be nothing to us. We shall never be able to spend it fast enough." "We'll try what we can do, sir," says Tom. "We will," says the old gentleman. "Your name?" "Grigg," says Tom. The old gentleman embraced him again very tight, and without speaking another word, dragged him into the house in such an excited manner that it was as much as Tom could do to take his link and ladder with him and put them down in the passage. Gentlemen, if Tom hadn't been always remarkable for his love of truth, I think you would still have believed him when he said that all this was like a dream. There is no better way for a man to find out whether he is really asleep or awake than calling for something to eat. If he's in a dream, gentlemen, he'll find something wanting in flavor, depend on it. Tom explained his doubts to the old gentleman and said that if there was any cold meat in the house, it would ease his mind very much to test himself at once. The old gentleman ordered up a venison pie, a small ham, and a bottle of very old Madeira. At the first mouthful of pie and the first glass of wine, Tom smacks his lips and cries out, "I'm awake, wide awake." And to prove that he was so, gentlemen, he made an end of 'em both. When Tom had finished his meal, which he never spoke of afterwards without tears in his eyes, the old gentleman hugs him again and says, "Noble stranger, let us visit my young and lovely niece." Tom, who was a little elevated with the wine, replies, "The noble stranger is agreeable," at which words the old gentleman took him by the hand and led him to the parlor, crying as he opened the door, "Here is Mr. Grigg, the favorite of the planets." I will not attempt a description of female beauty, gentlemen, for every one of us has a model of his own that suits his own taste best. In this parlor that I am speaking of, there were 2 young ladies, and if every gentleman present will imagine 2 models of his own in their places, and will be kind enough to polish him up to the very highest pitch of perfection, he will then have a faint conception of their uncommon radiance. Besides these 2 young ladies, there was their waiting woman, that under any other circumstances Tom would have looked upon as a Venus. And besides her, there was a tall, thin, dismal-faced young gentleman, half man and half boy, dressed in a childish suit of clothes, very much too short in the legs and arms, and looking, according to Tom's comparison, like one of the wax juveniles from a tailor's dog, grown up and run to seed. Now, this youngster stamped his foot upon the ground and looked very fierce at Tom, and Tom looked very fierce at him, for to tell the truth, gentlemen, Tom more than half suspected that when they entered the room, he was kissing one of the young ladies, and for anything Tom knew, you observe, it might be his young lady, which was not pleasant. "Sir," says Tom, "before we proceed any further, will you have the goodness to inform me who this young salamander," Tom called him that for aggravation, you perceive, gentlemen, "who this young salamander may be?" "That Mr. Gregg," says the old gentleman, "is my little boy. He was christened Galileo Isaac Newton Flamstead. Don't mind him, he's a mere child." "And a very fine child, too," says Tom, still aggravating, you'll observe. "Of his age, and as good as fine, I have no doubt. How do you do, my man?" With which kind and patronizing expressions, Tom reached up to pat him on the head and quoted 2 lines about little boys from Dr. Watts's hymns, which he had learnt at a Sunday school. It was very easy to see, gentlemen, by this youngster's frowning, and by the waiting maid's tossing her head and turning up her nose, and by the young ladies turning their backs and talking together at the other end of the room, that nobody but the old gentleman took very kindly to the noble stranger. Indeed, Tom plainly heard the waiting woman say of her master that so far from being able to read the stars as he pretended, she didn't believe he knew his letters in him, or at best that he had got further than words in one syllable. But Tom not minding this, for he was in spirits after the Madeira, looks with an agreeable air towards the young ladies, and kissing his hand to both, says to the old gentleman, "Which is which?" "This," says the old gentleman, leading out the handsomest, if one of 'em could possibly be said to be handsomer than the other. "This is my niece, Miss Fanny Barker." "If you'll permit me, miss," says Tom, "being a noble stranger and a favorite of the planets, I will conduct myself as such." With these words, he kisses the young lady in a very affable way, turns to the old gentleman, slaps him on the back, and says, "When's it to come off, my buck?" The young lady colored so deep, and her lip trembled so much, gentlemen, that Tom really thought she was going to cry. But she kept her feelings down, and turning to the old gentleman, she says, "Dear uncle, though you have the absolute disposal of my hand and fortune, and though you mean well in disposing of them thus, I ask you whether you don't think this is a mistake. Don't you think, dear uncle," she says, "that the stars must be in error? Is it not possible that the comet may have put him out?" "The stars," says the old gentleman, "couldn't make a mistake if they tried. Emma," he says to the other young lady. "Yes, papa," says she. "The same day that makes your cousin Mrs. Grigg will unite you to the gifted Mooney. No remonstrance, no tears. Now, Mr. Grigg, let me conduct you to that hallowed ground, that philosophical retreat, where my friend and partner, the gifted Mooney, of whom I have just now spoken, is even now pursuing those discoveries which shall enrich us with the precious metal and make us masters of the world." "Come, Mr. Grigg," he says. "With all my heart, sir," replies Tom, "and luck to the gifted Mooney, say I, not so much on his account as for our worthy selves." With this sentiment, Tom kissed his hand to the ladies again and followed him out, having the gratification to perceive, as he looked back, that they were all hanging on by the arms and legs of Galileo Isaac Newton Flamstead, to prevent him from following the noble stranger and tearing him to pieces. Gentlemen, Tom's father-in-law, that was to be, took him by the hand, and having lighted a little lamp, led him across a paved courtyard at the back of the house into a very large, dark, gloomy room, filled with all manners of bottles, globes, books, telescopes, crocodiles, alligators, and other scientific instruments of every kind. In the center of this room was a stove or furnace, with what Tom called a pot, but which, in my opinion, was a crucible in full boil. In one corner was a sort of ladder leading through the roof, and up this ladder the old gentleman pointed, as he said in a whisper, "The observatory. Mr. Mooney is even now watching for the precise time at which we are to come into all the riches of the earth. It will be necessary for he and I, alone in that silent place, to cast your nativity before the hour arrives. Put the day and minute of your birth on this piece of paper, and leave the rest to me." "You don't mean to say," says Tom, doing as he was told and giving him back the paper, "that I'm to wait here long, do you? It's a precious dismal place." "Hush," says the old gentleman, "it's hallowed ground. Farewell." "Stop a minute," says Tom. "What a hurry you're in. What's in that large bottle yonder?" "It's a child with 3 heads, says the old gentleman, "and everything else in proportion." "Why don't you throw him away?" says Tom. "What do you keep such unpleasant things here for?" "Throw him away," cries the old gentleman. "We use him constantly in astrology. He's a charm." "I shouldn't have thought it," said Tom, from his appearance. Must you go, I say? The old gentleman makes him no answer, but climbs up the ladder in a greater bustle than ever. Tom looked after his legs till there was nothing of him left, and then sat down to wait, feeling, so he used to say, as comfortable as if he was going to be made a Freemason, and they were heating the pokers. Tom waited so long, gentlemen, that he began to think it must be getting on for midnight at least, felt more dismal and lonely than ever he had done in all his life. He tried every means of whiling away the time, but it never had seemed to move so slow. First, he took a nearer view of the child with 3 heads, and thought what a comfort it must have been to his parents. Then he looked up a long telescope, which was pointed out of the window, but saw nothing particular, in consequence of the stopper being on at the other end. Then he came to a skeleton in a glass case labeled Skeleton of a Gentleman, prepared by Mr. Mooney, which made him hope that Mr. Mooney might not be in the habit of preparing gentlemen that way without their own consent. 100 times, at least, he looked into the pot where they were boiling the philosopher's stone down to the proper consistency. When it is, thinks Tom, I'll send out for 6 pen'orth of sprats and turn him into goldfish for a first experiment. Besides which, he made up his mind, gentlemen, to have a country house and a park, and to plant a bit of it with a double row of gas lamps a mile long, and go out every night with a French-polished mahogany ladder and 2 servants in livery behind him, to light him for his own pleasure. At length and at last, the old gentleman's legs appeared upon the steps leading through the roof, and he came slowly down, bringing along with him the gifted Mooney. This Mooney, gentlemen, was even more scientific in appearance than his friend, and had, as Tom often declared upon his word and honor, the dirtiest face we can possibly know of in this imperfect state of existence. Gentlemen, you are all aware that if a scientific man isn't absent in his mind, he's of no good at all. Mr. Mooney was so absent that when the old gentleman said to him, "Shake hands with Mr. Gregg," he put out his leg. "Here's a mind, Mr. Gregg," cries the old gentleman in a rapture. "Here's philosophy, here's rumination. Don't disturb him," he says, "for this is amazing." Tom had no wish to disturb him, having nothing particular to say, but he was so uncommonly amazing that the old gentleman got impatient and determined to give him an electric shock to bring him to. "For you must know, Mr. Gregg," he says, "that we always keep a strongly charged battery ready for that purpose." These means being resorted to, gentlemen, the gifted Mooney revived with a loud roar, and he no sooner came to himself than both he and the old gentleman looked at Tom with compassion, and shed tears abundantly. "My dear friend," says the old gentleman to the gifted, "prepare him." "I say," cries Tom, falling back, "none of that, you know. No preparing by Mr. Mooney, if you please." "Alas," replies the old gentleman, "you don't understand us. My friend, inform him of his fate. I can't." The gifted mustered up his voice after many efforts and informed Tom that his nativity had been carefully cast, and he would expire at exactly 35 minutes, 27 seconds, and 5/6 of a second past 9 o'clock a.m. on that day, 2 months. Gentlemen, I leave you to judge what were Tom's feelings at this announcement on the eve of matrimony and endless riches. "I think," he says in a trembling voice, "there must be a mistake in the working of that sum. Will you do me the favor to cast it up again? "There is no mistake," replies the old gentleman. "It is confirmed by Francis Moore, physician. Here is the prediction for tomorrow, 2 months. And he showed him the page, where sure enough were these words: "The decease of a great person may be looked for about this time." "Which," says the old gentleman, "is clearly you, Mr. Grigg." "Too clearly," cries Tom, sinking into a chair, and giving one hand to the old gentleman and one to the gifted. "The orb of day has set on Thomas Grigg forever." At this affected remark, the gifted shed tears again, and the other two mingled their tears with his in a kind, if I may use the expression, of Mooney and Company's entire. But the old gentleman, recovering first, observed that this was only a reason for hastening the marriage, in order that Tom's distinguished race be transmitted to posterity, and requesting the gifted to console Mr. Grigg during his temporary absence, he withdrew to settle the preliminaries with his niece immediately. And now, gentlemen, a very extraordinary and remarkable occurrence took place, for as Tom sat in a melancholy way in one chair, and the gifted sat in a melancholy way in another, a couple of doors were thrown violently open. The two young ladies rushed in, and one knelt down in a loving attitude at Tom's feet, and the other at the gifted's. So far, perhaps, as Tom was concerned, as he used to say, you will say there was nothing strange in this, but you will be of a different opinion when you understand that Tom's young lady was kneeling to the gifted, and the gifted's young lady was kneeling to Tom. "Holla! Stop a minute," cries Tom. "Here's a mistake. I need condoling with by sympathizing woman under my afflicting circumstances. But we're out in the figure. Change partners, Mooney." "Monster!" cries Tom's young lady, clinging to the gifted. "Miss," says Tom, "is that your manners?" "I abjure thee," cries Tom's young lady. "I renounce thee. I never will be thine." "Thou," she says to the gifted, "art the object of my first and all-engrossing passion. Wrapped in thy sublime visions, thou hast not perceived my love, but, driven to despair, I now shake off the woman and avow it. Oh, cruel, cruel man!" With which reproach she laid her head upon the gifted's breast, and put her arms out about him in the tenderest manner possible, gentlemen. "And I," says the other young lady, in a sort of ecstasy that made Tom start, "I hereby abjure my chosen husband too. Hear me, goblin." This was to the gifted. "Hear me. I hold thee in the deepest detestation. The maddening interview of this one night has filled my soul with love, but not for thee. It is for thee, young man," she cries to Tom. "As Monk Lewis finely observes, Thomas, Thomas, I am thine, Thomas, Thomas. Thou art mine, thine forever, mine forever." With which words she became very tender likewise. Tom and the gifted, gentlemen, as you may believe, looked at each other in a very awkward manner, and with thoughts not at all complimentary to the young ladies. As to the gifted, I have heard Tom say often that he was certain he was in a fit, and had it inwardly. "Speak to me, oh, speak to me," cries Tom's young lady to the gifted. "I don't want to speak to anybody," he says, finding his voice at last and trying to push her away. "I think I had better go. I'm frightened," he says, looking about as if he had lost something. "Not one look of love," she cries. "Hear me while I declare." "I don't know how to look a look of love," he says, all in amaze. don't declare anything. I don't want to hear anybody." "That's right," cries the old gentleman, who, it seems, had been listening. "That's right. Don't hear her. Emma shall marry you tomorrow, my friend, whether she likes it or not, and she shall marry Mr. Grigg." Gentlemen, these words were no sooner out of his mouth than Galileo Isaac Newton Flamstead, who, it seems, had been listening too, darts in, and spinning around and round like a young giant's top, cries, "Let her, let her! I'm fierce, I'm furious. I give her leave. I'll never marry anybody after this. Never. It isn't safe. She is the falsest of the false," he cries, tearing his hair and gnashing his teeth, "and I'll live and die a bachelor." "The little boy," observed the gifted gravely, albeit of tender years, has spoken wisdom. I have been led to the contemplation of womankind, and will not adventure on the troubled waters of matrimony. "What?" says the old gentleman. "Not marry my daughter? Won't you, Mooney? Not if I make her? Won't you, won't you?" "No," says Mooney, "I won't. And if anybody asks me any more, I'll run away and never come back again." "Mr. Grigg," says the old gentleman, "the stars must be obeyed. You have not changed your mind because of a little girlish folly, eh, Mr. Grigg?" Tom, gentleman, had had his eyes about him, and was pretty sure that all this was a device and trick of the waiting maid to put him off his inclination. He had seen her hiding and skipping about the two doors, and had observed that a very little whispering from her pacified the salamander directly. "So," thinks Tom, "this is a plot, but it won't fit." "Hey, Mr. Grigg," says the old gentleman. "Why, sir," says Tom, pointing to the crucible, "if the soup's nearly ready." "Another hour beholds the consummation of our labors," returned the old gentleman. "Very good," says Tom, with a mournful air. "It's only for 2 months, but I may as well be the richest man in the world even for that time. I'm not particular. I'll take her, sir. I'll take her." The old gentleman was in a rapture to find Tom still in the same mind, and drawing the young lady towards him by little and little, was joining their hands by main force, when all of a sudden, gentlemen, the crucible blows up with a great crash. Everybody screams. The room is filled with smoke, and Tom, not knowing what may happen next, throws himself into a fancy attitude and says, "Come on, if you're a man," without addressing himself to anybody in particular. "The labors of 15 years, says the old gentleman, clasping his hand and looking down upon the gifted, who was saving the pieces, "are destroyed in an instant." And I am told, gentlemen, by the by, that this same philosopher's stone would have been discovered 100 times at least, to speak within bounds, if it wasn't for the one unfortunate circumstance that the apparatus always blows up when it's on the very point of succeeding. Tom turns pale when he hears the old gentleman expressing himself to this unpleasant effect, and stammers out that if it's quite agreeable to all parties, he would like to know exactly what has happened, and what change has really taken place in the prospects of that company. "We have failed for the present, Mr. Grigg," says the old gentleman, wiping his forehead, "and I regret it the more because I have in fact invested my niece's £5,000 in this glorious speculation. But don't be cast down," he says anxiously. "In another 15 years, Mr. Grigg." "Oh," cries Tom, letting the young lady's hand fall. "Were the stars very positive about this union, sir?" "They were," says the old gentleman. "I'm sorry to hear it," Tom makes answer, "for it's no good, sir." "No what?" cries the old gentleman. "Go, sir," says Tom fiercely. "I forbid the banns." And with these words, which are the very words he used, he sat himself down in a chair, and laying his head upon the table, thought with a secret grief of what was to come to pass on that day 2 months. Tom always said, gentlemen, that waiting maid was the artfulest minx he had ever seen, and he left it in writing in this country when he went to colonize abroad, that he was certain in his own mind she and the salamander had blown up the philosopher's stone on purpose, and to cut him out of his property. I believe Tom was in the right, gentlemen, but whether or no, she comes forward at this point and says, "May I speak, sir?" And the old gentleman answering, "Yes, you may," she goes on to say that the stars are no doubt quite right in every respect, but Tom is not the man. And she says, "Don't you remember, sir, that when the clock struck 5 this afternoon, you gave Master Galileo a rap on the head with your telescope and told him to get out of the way?" "Yes, I do," says the old gentleman. "Then," says the waiting maid, "I say he's the man, and the prophecy is fulfilled." The old gentleman staggers at this as if somebody had hit him a blow on the chest, and cries, Why, he's a boy." Upon that, gentlemen, the salamander cries out that he'll be 21 next Lady Day, and complains that his father has always been so busy with the sun round which the earth revolves that he has never taken any notice of the sun that revolves around him, and that he hasn't had a new suit of clothes since he was 14, and that he wasn't even taken out of nankeen frocks and trousers till he was quite unpleasant in them, and touches on a good many more family matters to the same purpose. To make short of a long story, gentlemen, they all talk together and cry together, and remind the old gentleman that as to the noble family, his own grandfather would have been Lord Mayor if he hadn't died at a dinner the year before. They showed him by all kinds of arguments that if the cousins are married, the prediction comes true every way. At last, the old gentleman, being quite convinced, gives in, and joins their hands, and leaves his daughter to marry anybody she likes, and they're all well pleased, and the gifted as well as any of them. In the middle of this little family party, gentlemen, sits Tom all the while as miserable as you like. But when everything else is arranged, the old gentleman's daughter says that their strange conduct was a little device of the waiting maid's to disgust the lovers he had chosen for him. And will he forgive her? And if he will, perhaps he might even find her a husband. And when she says that, she looks uncommon hard at Tom. Then the waiting maid says that, oh dear, she couldn't abear Mr. Griggs should think she wanted him to marry her, and that she had even gone so far as to refuse the last lamplighter, who was now a literary character, having set up as a bill sticker, and that she hoped Mr. Grigg would not suppose she was on her last legs by any means, for the baker was very strong in his attentions at that moment, and as to the butcher, he was frantic. And I don't know how much more she might have said, gentlemen, for as you know, this kind of young women are rare ones to talk, if the old gentleman hadn't cut in suddenly, and asked Tom if he'd have her, with £10 to recompense him for his loss of time and disappointment, and as a kind of bribe to keep the story secret. "It don't much matter, sir," says Tom. "I ain't long for this world. 8 weeks of marriage, especially with this young woman, might reconcile me to my fate, I think," he says. "I could go off easy after that." With which he embraces her with a very dismal face, and groans in a way that might move a heart of stone, even of philosopher's stone. "Egad," says the old gentleman, "that reminds me, this bustle put it out of my head. There was a figure wrong. He'll live to a green old age, 87 at least." "How much, sir?" cries Tom. 87, says the old gentleman. Without another word, Tom flings himself on the old gentleman's neck, throws up his hat, cuts a caper, defies the waiting maid, and refers her to the butcher. "You won't marry her," says the old gentleman angrily. "And live after it," says Tom. "I'd sooner marry a mermaid with a small toothed comb and looking-glass." "Then take the consequences," says the other. With those words, I beg your kind attention here, gentlemen, for it's worth your notice. The old gentleman wetted the forefinger of his right hand in some of the liquor from the crucible that was spilt on the floor, and drew a small triangle on Tom's forehead. The room swam before his eyes, and he found himself in the watch-house. "Found himself where?" cried the vice on behalf of the company generally. "In the watch-house," said the chairman. It was late at night, and he found himself in the very watch-house from which he had been let out that morning. "Did he go home?" asked the vice. "The watch-house people rather objected to that," said the chairman. "So he stopped there that night and went before the magistrate in the morning." "Why, you're here again, are you?" says the magistrate, adding insult to injury. "We'll trouble you for 5 shillings more if you can conveniently spare the money." Tom told him he had been enchanted, but it was of no use. He told the contractors the same, but they wouldn't believe him. It was very hard upon him, gentlemen, as he often said, for was it likely he'd go and invent such a tale? They shook their heads and told him he'd say anything but his prayers, as indeed he would. There's no doubt about that. It was the only imputation on his moral character that ever I heard of. The End. Dr. Marigold by Charles Dickens. Narrated by Senovia Han. I am a cheap jack, and my own father's name was Willem Marigold. It was in his lifetime supposed by some that his name was William, but my own father always consistently said no, it was Willem. On which point I content myself with looking at the argument this way. If a man is not allowed to know his own name in a free country, how much is he allowed to know in a land of slavery? As to looking at the argument through the medium of the register, Willem Marigold come into the world before registers come up much, and went out of it too. They wouldn't have been greatly in his line neither, if they had chanced to come up before him. I was born on the Queen's highway, but it was the King's at that time. A doctor was fetched to my own mother by my own father, when it took place on a common, and in consequence of his being a very kind gentleman, and accepting no fee but a tea-tray, I was named doctor, out of gratitude and compliment to him. There you have me, Dr. Marigold. I am at present a middle-aged man of a broadish build, in cords, leggings, and a sleeved waistcoat, the strings of which is always gone behind. Repair them how you will, they go like fiddle-strings. You have been to the theatre, and you have seen one of the violin players screw up his violin after listening to it as if it had been whispering the secret to him that it feared it was out of order, and then you have heard it snap. That's as exactly similar to my waistcoat as a waistcoat and a violin can be like one another. I am partial to a white hat, and I like a shawl around my neck wore loose and easy. Sitting down is my favorite posture. If I have a taste in point of personal jewelry, it is mother-of-pearl buttons. There, you have me again, as large as life. The doctor having accepted a tea-tray, you'll guess that my father was a cheap jack before me. You are right. He was. It was a pretty tray. It represented a large lady going along a serpentining uphill gravel walk to attend a little church. 2 swans had likewise come astray with the same intentions. When I call her a large lady, I don't mean in point of breadth, for there she fell below my views. But she more than made it up in height. Her height and slimness was, in short, the height of both. I often saw that tray, after I was the innocently smiling cause, or more likely screeching one, of the doctor's standing it up on a table against the wall in his consulting room. Whenever my own father and mother were in that part of the country, I used to put my head, I have heard my own mother say, it was flaxen curls at that time, though you wouldn't know an old hearth broom from it now till you come to the handle, and found it wasn't me, in at the doctor's door, and the doctor was always glad to see me, and said, "Aha, my brother practitioner. Come in, little M.D. How are your inclinations as to sixpence? You can't go on forever, you'll find, nor yet could my father, nor yet my mother, if you don't go off as a whole when you are about due. You're liable to go off in part, and 2 to 1 your head's the part." Gradually, my father went off his, and my mother went off hers. It was in a harmless way, but it put out the family where I boarded them. The old couple, though retired, got to be wholly and solely devoted to the cheap-jack business, and were always selling the family off. Whenever the cloth was laid for dinner, my father began rattling the plates and dishes, as we do in our line when we put up crockery for a bid, only he had lost the trick of it, and mostly let him drop and broke 'em. As the old lady had been used to sit in the cart, and hand the articles out one by one to the old gentleman on the footboard to sell, just in the same way she handed him every item of the family's property, and they disposed of it in their own imaginations from morning to night. At last the old gentleman, lying bedridden in the same room with the old lady, cries out in the old patter, fluent, after having been silent for 2 days and nights, "Now hear, my jolly companions everyone, which the Nightingale Club in a village was held, at the sign of the Cabbage and Shears, where the singers no doubt would have greatly excelled, but for want of taste, voices, and ears. Now, here, my jolly companions, everyone, is a working model of a used-up old Cheap Jack, without a tooth in his head, and with a pain in every bone, so like life that it would be just as good if it wasn't better, just as bad if it wasn't worse, and just as new if it wasn't worn out. Bid for the working model of the old Cheap Jack, who has drunk more gunpowder tea with the ladies in his time than would blow the lid off a washerwoman's copper, and carry it as many thousands of miles higher than the moon as naught nix naught, divided by the national debt, carry nothing to the poor rates, 3 under and 2 over. Now, my hearts of oak and men of straw, what do you say for the lot? 2 shillings, a shilling, 10 pence, 8 pence, 6 pence, 4 pence, 2 pence? Who said 2 pence? The gentleman in the scarecrow's hat? I'm ashamed of the gentleman in the scarecrow's hat. I really am ashamed of him for his want of public spirit. Now I'll tell you what I'll do with you. Come, I'll throw you in a working model of an old woman that was married to the old Cheap Jack so long ago that upon my word and honor it took place in Noah's Ark, before the unicorn could get in to forbid the banns by blowing a tune upon his horn. There now, come, what do you say for both? I'll tell you what I'll do with you. I don't bear you malice for being so backward. Here, if you make me a bid that'll only reflect a little credit on your town, I'll throw you in a warming pan for nothing, and lend you a toasting fork for life. Now come, what do you say after this splendid offer? Say £2, say 30 shillings, say £1, say 10 shillings, say 5, say 2 and 6. You don't say even 2 and 6? You say 2 and 3. No, you shan't have the lot for 2 and 3. I'd sooner give it to you, if you was good-looking enough. Here, missus, chuck the old man and woman into the cart, put the horse to, and drive 'em away and bury 'em. Such were the last words of Willem Marigold, my own father, and they were carried out by him and by his wife, my own mother, on one and the same day as I ought to know, having followed as mourner. My father had been a lovely one in his time at the Cheap Jack work, as his dying observations went to prove. But I top him. I don't say it because it's myself, but because it has been universally acknowledged by all that has had the means of comparison. I have worked at it. I have measured myself against other public speakers, members of Parliament, platforms, pulpits, counsel learned in the law, and where I have found him good, I have took a bit of imagination from him, and where I have found him bad, I have let him alone. Now I'll tell you what. I mean to go down into my grave declaring that of all the callings ill-used in Great Britain, the Cheap Jack calling is the worst used. Why ain't we a profession? Why ain't we endowed with privileges? Why are we forced to take out a hawker's license when no such thing is expected of the political hawkers? Where's the difference betwixt us, except that we are Cheap Jacks and they are Dear Jacks? I don't see any difference but what's in our favor. For look here, say it's election time. I am on the footboard of my cart in the marketplace on a Saturday night. I put up a general miscellaneous lot. I say, now here, my free and independent voters, I am going to give you such a chance as you never had in all your born days, nor yet the days preceding. Now I'll show you what I'm going to do for you. Here's a pair of razors that'll shave you closer than the Board of Guardians. Here's a flat iron worth its weight in gold. Here's a frying pan artificially flavored with essence of beef steaks to that degree that you've only got for the rest of your lives to fry bread and dripping in it. And there you are replete with animal food. Here's a genuine chronometer watch in such a solid silver case that you may knock at the door with it when you come home late from a social meeting and rouse your wife and family and save up your knocker for the postman. And here's half a dozen dinner plates that you may play the cymbals with to charm baby when it's fractious. Stop. I'll throw in another article, and I'll give you that, and it's a rolling pin. And if the baby can only get it well into its mouth when its teeth is coming, and rub the gums once with it, they'll come through double, in a fit of laughter equal to being tickled. Stop again. I'll throw you in another article, because I don't like the looks of you, for you haven't the appearance of buyers unless I lose by you, and because I'd rather lose than not take money tonight, and that's a looking-glass in which you may see how ugly you look when you don't bid. What do you say now? Come, do you say £1? Not you, for you haven't got it. Do you say 10 shillings? Not you, for you owe more to the tallyman. Well, then I'll tell you what I'll do with you. I'll heap 'em all on the footboard of the cart. There they are. Razors, flat watch, dinner plates, rolling pin, and away with 4 shillings, and I'll give you 6 pence for your trouble. This is me, the Cheap Jack. But on the Monday morning, in the same marketplace, comes the Dear Jack on the hustings, his cart, and what does he say? Now, my free and independent voters, I am going to give you such a chance. He begins just like me, as you never had in all your born days, and that's the chance of sending myself to Parliament. Now I'll tell you what I'm going to do for you. Here's the interests of this magnificent town, promoted above all the rest of the civilized and uncivilized earth. Here's your railways carried, and your neighbors' railways jockeyed. Here's all your sons in the post office. Here's Britannia smiling on you. Here's eyes of Europe on you. Here's universal prosperity for you. Repletion of animal food, golden cornfields, gladsome homesteads, and rounds of applause from your own hearts, all in one lot. And that's myself. Will you take me as I stand? You won't? Well, then, I'll tell you what I'll do with you. Come now, I'll throw you in anything you ask for. There, church rates, abolition of more malt tax, no malt tax, universal education to the highest mark, or universal ignorance to the lowest, total abolition of flogging in the army, or a dozen for every private once a month all round, wrongs of men or rights of women, only say which it shall be, take 'em or leave 'em, and I'm of your opinion altogether, and the lot's your own on your own terms. There. You won't take it yet? Well, then I'll tell you what I'll do with you. Come, you are such free and independent voters, and I am so proud of you. You are such a noble and enlightened constituency, and I am so ambitious of the honor and dignity of being your member, which is by far the highest level to which the wings of the human mind can soar, that I'll tell you what I'll do with you. I'll throw you in all the public houses in your magnificent town for nothing. Will that content you? It won't. You won't take the lot yet? Well, then, before I put the horse in and drive away and make the offer to the next most magnificent town that can be discovered, I'll tell you what I'll do. Take the lot, and I'll drop £2,000 in the streets of your magnificent town for them to pick up that can. Not enough. Now look here, this is the very furthest that I'm a-going to. I'll make it 2,500. And still you won't? Here, missus, put the horse... No, stop half a moment. I shouldn't like to turn my back upon you neither for a trifle. I'll make it £2,750. There. Take the lot on your own terms, and I'll count out £2,750 on the footboard of the cart, to be dropped in the streets of your magnificent town for them to pick up that can. What do you say? Come now, you won't do better, and you may do worse. You take it? Hooray! Sold again, and got the seat. These dear jacks soap the people shameful, but we cheap jacks don't. We tell 'em the truth about themselves to their faces, and scorn to court 'em. As to venturesomeness in the way of puffing up the lots, the dear jacks beat us hollow. It is considered in the cheap jack calling that better patter can be made out of a gun than any article we put up from the cart, except a pair of spectacles. I often hold forth about a gun for a quarter of an hour, and feel as if I need never leave off. But when I tell 'em what the gun can do and what the gun has brought down, I never go half so far as the dear jacks do when they make speeches in praise of their guns, their great guns that set 'em on to do it. Besides, I'm in business for myself. I ain't sent down into the marketplace to order as they are. Besides, again, my guns don't know what I say in their laudation, and their guns do, and the whole concern of 'em have reason to be sick and ashamed all round. These are some of my arguments for declaring that the cheap jack calling is treated ill in Great Britain, and for turning warm when I think of the other jacks in question setting themselves up to pretend to look down upon it. I courted my wife from the footboard of the cart. I did indeed. She was a Suffolk young woman, and it was in Ipswich marketplace right opposite the corn chandler's shop. I had noticed her up at a window last Saturday, that was, appreciating highly. I had took to her, and I had said to myself, if not already disposed of, I'll have that lot. Next Saturday that come, I pitched the cart on the same pitch, and I was in very high feather indeed, keeping him laughing the whole of the time, and getting off the goods briskly. At last I took out of my waistcoat pocket a small lot wrapped in soft paper, and I put it this way, looking up at the window where she was. Now here, my blooming English maidens, is an article, the last article of the present evening's sale, which I offer to only you, the lovely Suffolk dumplings, biling over with beauty, and I won't take a bid of £1,000 for from any man alive. Now what is it? Why, I'll tell you what it is. It's made of fine gold, and it's not broke, though there's a hole in the middle of it, and it's stronger than any fetter that ever was forged, though it's smaller than any finger in my set of 10. Why 10? Because when my parents made over my property to me, I tell you true, there was 12 sheets, 12 towels, 12 tablecloths, 12 knives, 12 forks, 12 tablespoons, and 12 teaspoons, but my set of fingers was too short of a dozen, and I could never since be matched. Now what else is it? Come, I'll tell you. It's a hoop of solid gold, wrapped in a silver curl paper that I myself took off the shining locks of the ever-beautiful old lady in Threadneedle Street, London City. I wouldn't tell you so if I hadn't the paper to show, or you mightn't believe it even of me. Now what else is it? It's a man-trap, and a handcuff, the parish stocks and a leg-lock, all in gold and all in one. Now what else is it? It's a wedding ring. Well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do with it. I'm not a-going to offer this lot for money, but I mean to give it to the next of you beauties that laughs, and I'll pay her a visit tomorrow morning at exactly 9:30 as the chimes go, and I'll take her out for a walk to put up the banns. She laughed and got the ring handed up to her. When I called in the morning, she says, "Oh, dear, it's never you, and you never mean it." "It's ever me," says I, "and I am ever yours, and I ever mean it." So we got married, after being put up 3 times, which, by the by, is quite in the Cheap Jack way again, and shows once more how the Cheap Jack customs pervade society. She wasn't a bad wife, but she had a temper, and she could have parted with that one article at a sacrifice. I wouldn't have swooped her away in exchange for any other woman in England. Not that I ever did swoop her away, for we lived together till she died, and that was 13 year. Now, my lords and ladies and gentlefolks all, I'll let you into a secret, though you won't believe it. 13 year of temper in a palace would try the worst of you, but 13 year of temper in a cart would try the best of you. You are kept so very close to it in a cart, you see. There's thousands of couples among you getting on like sweet oil upon a whetstone in houses 5 and 6 pairs of stairs high that would go to the divorce court in a cart. Whether the jolting makes it worse, I don't undertake to decide, but in a cart it does come home to you and stick to you. Violence in a cart is so violent, and aggravation in a cart is so aggravating. We might have had such a pleasant life. A roomy cart with the large goods hung outside, and the bed slung underneath it when on the road, an iron pot and a kettle, a fireplace for the cold weather, a chimney for the smoke, a hanging shelf and a cupboard, a dog and a horse. What more do you want? You draw off upon a bit of turf in a green lane or by the roadside. You hobble your old horse and turn him grazing. You light your fire upon the ashes of the last visitors. You cook your stew, and you wouldn't call the Emperor of France your father, but have a temper in the cart, flinging language and the hardest goods in stock at you, and where are you then? Put a name to your feelings. My dog knew as well when she was on the turn as I did. Before she broke out, he would give a howl and bolt. How he knew it was a mystery to me, but the sure and certain knowledge of it would wake him up out of his soundest sleep, and he would give a howl and bolt. At such times I wished I was him. The worst of it was, we had a daughter born to us, and I love children with all my heart. When she was in her furies, she beat the child. This got to be so shocking, as the child got to be 4 or 5 year old, that I have many a time gone on with my whip over my shoulder, at the old horse's head, sobbing and crying worse than ever little Sophie did. For how could I prevent it? Such a thing is not to be tried with such a temper in a cart. without coming to a fight. It's in the natural size and formation of a cart to bring it to a fight. And then the poor child got worse terrified than before, as well as worse hurt generally, and her mother made complaints to the next people we lighted on, and the word went round. Here's a wretch of a Cheap Jack been a-beating his wife. Little Sophie was such a brave child. She grew to be quite devoted to her poor father, though he could do so little to help her. She had a wonderful quantity of shining dark hair, all curling natural about her. It is quite astonishing to me now that I didn't go tearing mad when I used to see her run from her mother before the cart, and her mother catch her by this hair and pull her down by it, and beat her. Such a brave child I said she was. Ah, with reason. "Don't you mind next time, father dear?" she would whisper to me with her little face still flushed and her bright eyes still wet. "If I don't cry out, you may know I am not much hurt, and even if I do cry out, it will only be to get mother to let go and leave off." Would I have seen the little spirit bear for me without crying out? Yet, in other respects, her mother took great care of her. Her clothes were always clean and neat, and her mother was never tired of working at him. Such is the inconsistency in things. Our being down in the marsh country in unhealthy weather, I consider the cause of Sophie's taking bad low fever. But, however, she took it. Once she got it, she turned away from her mother forevermore, and nothing would persuade her to be touched by her mother's hand. She would shiver and say, "No, no, no," when it was offered at, and would hide her face on my shoulder and hold me tighter round the neck. The Cheap Jack business had been worse than ever I had known it. What with one thing and what with another, and not least with railroads which will cut it all to pieces, I expect, at last. And I was run dry of money. For which reason, one night at that period of little Sophie's being so bad, either we must have come to a deadlock for victuals and drink, or I must have pitched the cart as I did. I couldn't get the dear child to lie down or leave go of me, and indeed I hadn't the heart to try. So I stepped out on the footboard with her holding round my neck. They all set up a laugh when they see us, and one chuckle-headed Joskin, that I hated for it, made the bidding. 2 pence for her. "Now, you country boobies," says I, feeling as if my heart was a heavy weight at the end of a broken sash line, "I give you notice that I am a-going to charm the money out of your pockets, and to give you so much more than your money's worth, that you'll only persuade yourselves to draw your Saturday nights' wages ever again afterwards by the hopes of meeting me to lay 'em out with, which you never will. And why not? Because I've made my fortunes by selling my goods on a large scale for 75% less than I give for 'em, and I am consequently to be elevated to the House of Peers next week by the title of the Duke of Cheap and Marquis Jackaloral. Now, let's know what you want tonight, and you shall have it. But first of all, shall I tell you why I have got this little girl round my neck? You don't want to know? Then you shall. She belongs to the fairies. She's a fortune-teller. She can tell me all about you in a whisper, and can put me up to it whether you're going to buy a lot or leave it. Now, do you want a saw? No, she says you don't, because you're too clumsy to use one. Else here's a saw which would be a lifelong blessing to a handy man, at 4 shillings, at 3 and 6, at 3, at 2 and 6, at 2, at 18 pence. But none of you shall have it at any price, on account of your well-known awkwardness, which would make it manslaughter. The same objection applies to this set of 3 planes, which I won't let you have neither, so don't bid for 'em. Now, I am going to ask her what you do want." Then I whispered, "Your head burns so that I am afraid it hurts you bad, my pet." And she answered, without opening her heavy eyes, "Just a little, father." Oh, this little fortune-teller says it's a memorandum book you want. Then why didn't you mention it? Here it is. Look at it. 200 superfine, hot-pressed, wire-wove pages. If you don't believe me, count 'em. Ready ruled for your expenses, an everlastingly pointed pencil to put him down with, a double-bladed penknife to scratch him out with, a book of printed tables to calculate your income with, and a camp stool to sit down upon while you give your mind to it. Stop! And an umbrella to keep the moon off when you give your mind to it on a pitch-dark night. Now I won't ask you how much for the lot, but how little. How little are you thinking of? Don't be ashamed to mention it, because my fortune-teller knows already. Then, making believe to whisper, I kissed her, and she kissed me. Why, she says you are thinking of as little as 3 and 3 pence. I couldn't have believed it, even of you, unless she told me. 3 and 3 pence, and a set of printed tables in the lot that'll calculate your income up to 40,000 a year. With an income of 40,000 a year, you grudge 3 and 6 pence. Well then, I'll tell you my opinion. I so despise the 3 pence that I'd sooner take 3 shillings. There, for 3 shillings, 3 shillings, 3 shillings. Gone. Hand him over to the lucky man. As there had been no bid at all, everybody looked about and grinned at everybody, while I touched little Sophie's face and asked her if she felt faint or giddy. Not very, father. It will soon be over. Then turning from the pretty patient eyes, which were opened now, and seeing nothing but grins across my lighted grease pot, I went on again in my cheap Jack style. Where's the butcher? My sorrowful eye had just caught sight of a fat young butcher on the outside of the crowd. She says the good luck is the butcher's. Where is he? Everybody handed on the blushing butcher to the front, and there was a roar, and the butcher felt himself obliged to put his hand in his pocket and take the lot. The party so picked out, in general, does feel obliged to take the lot. Good 4 times out of 6. Then we had another lot, the counterpart of that one, and sold it 6 pence cheaper, which is always very much enjoyed. Then we had the spectacles. It ain't a special profitable lot, but I put 'em on, and I see what the Chancellor of the Exchequer is going to take off the taxes, and I see what the sweetheart of the young woman in the shawl is doing at home, and I see what the bishops has got for dinner, and a deal more that seldom fails to fetch 'em up in their spirits, and the better their spirits, the better their bids. Then we had the ladies' lot, the teapot, the tea caddy, glass sugar basin, 6 spoons, and caudle cup, and all the time I was making similar excuses to give a look or two and say a word or two to my poor child. It was while the second ladies' lot was holding him in chain that I felt her lift herself a little on my shoulder to look across the dark street. What troubles you, darling? Nothing troubles me, father. I am not at all troubled. But don't I see a pretty churchyard over there? Yes, my dear. Kiss me twice, dear father, and lay me down to rest upon that churchyard grass so soft and green. I staggered back into the cart with her head dropped on my shoulder, and I says to her mother, Quick, shut the door. Don't let those laughing people see. What's the matter? She cries. Oh, woman, oh, woman. I tells her, You'll never catch my little Sophie by her hair again, for she has flown away from you. Maybe those were harder words than I meant 'em, but from that time forth, my wife took to brooding, and would sit in the cart or walk beside it hours at a stretch, with her arms crossed and her eyes looking on the ground. When her furies took her, which was rather seldomer than before, they took her in a new way, and she banged herself about to that extent that I was forced to hold her. She got none the better for a little drink now and then, and through some years I used to wonder, as I plodded along at the old horse's head, whether there was many carts upon the road that held so much dreariness as mine, for all my being looked up to as the king of the cheap jacks. So sad our lives went on, till one summer evening, when, as we were coming into Exeter, out of the farthest west of England, we saw a woman beating a child in a cruel manner, who screamed, "Don't beat me! Oh, mother, mother, mother!" Then my wife stopped her ears and ran away like a wild thing, and next day she was found in the river. Me and my dog were all the company left in the cart now, and the dog learned to give a short bark when they wouldn't bid, and to give another and a nod of his head when I asked him, "Who said half a crown? Are you the gentleman, sir, that offered half a crown?" He attained to an immense height of popularity, and I shall always believe taught himself entirely out of his own head to growl at any person in the crowd that bid as low as sixpence. But he got to be well on in years, and one night, convulsing York with the spectacles, he took a convulsion on his own account upon the very footboard by me, and it finished him. Being naturally of a tender turn, I had dreadful lonely feelings on me arter this. I conquer him at selling times, having a reputation to keep, not to mention keeping myself, but they got me down in private, and rolled upon me. That's often the way with us public characters. See us on the footboard, and you'd give pretty well anything you possess to be us. See us off the footboard, and you'd add a trifle to be off your bargain. It was under those circumstances that I come acquainted with a giant. I might have been too high to fall into conversation with him, had it not been for my lonely feelings. For the general rule is, going round the country, to draw the line at dressing up. When a man can't trust his getting a living to his undisguised abilities, you consider him below your sort, and this giant, when on view, figured as a Roman. He was a languid young man, which I attribute to the distance betwixt his extremities. He had a little head and less in it. He had weak eyes and weak knees, and altogether you couldn't look at him without feeling that there was greatly too much of him, both for his joints and his mind. But he was an amiable though timid young man. His mother let him out, and spent the money, and he come acquainted when he was walking to ease the horse betwixt two fairs. He was called Rinaldo di Velasco, his name being Pickleson. This giant, otherwise Pickleson, mentioned to me under the seal of confidence that, beyond his being a burden to himself, his life was made a burden to him by the cruelty of his master towards a stepdaughter who was deaf and dumb. Her mother was dead, and she had no living soul to take her part, and was used most hard. She travelled with his master's caravan only because there was nowhere to leave her, and this giant, otherwise Pickleson, did go so far as to believe that his master often tried to lose her. He was such a very languid young man, but I don't know how long it didn't take him to get the story out. But it passed through his defective circulation to his top extremity in course of time. When I heard this account from the giant, otherwise Pickleson, and likewise that the poor girl had beautiful long dark hair, and was often pulled down by it and beaten, I couldn't see the giant through what stood in my eyes. Having wiped him, I give him sixpence, for he was kept as short as he was long, and he laid it out in 2-3 pennorths of gin and water, which so brisked him up that he sang the favourite comic of Shivery Shaky Ain't It Cold, a popular effect which his master had tried every other means to get out of him as a Roman wholly in vain. His master's name was Mim, a weary horseman, and I knew him to speak to. I went to that fair as a mere civilian, leaving the cart outside the town, and I looked about the back of the vans while the performing was going on, and at last, sitting dozing against a muddy cart wheel, I came upon the poor girl who was deaf and dumb. At the first look I might also have judged that she had escaped from the wild beast show, but at the second I thought better of her, and thought that if she was more cared for and more kindly used, she would be like my child. She was just the same age that my own daughter would have been if her pretty head had not fell down upon my shoulder that unfortunate night. To cut it short, I spoke confidential to Mim while he was beating the gong outside betwixt two lots of Pickleson's publics, and I put it to him. She lies heavy on your own hands. What'll you take for her? Mim was a most ferocious swearer. Suppressing that part of his reply, which was much the longest part, his reply was, "A pair of braces." "Now I'll tell you," says I, "what I'm a-going to do with you. I'm a-going to fetch you 6 pair of the primest braces in the cart, and then to take her away with me." Says Mim, again ferocious, "I'll believe it when I've got the goods, and no sooner." I made all the haste I could, lest he should think twice of it, and the bargain was completed, which Pickleson he was thereby so relieved in his mind that he come out of his little back door, long ways like a serpent, and give us shivery shaky in a whisper among the wheels at parting. It was happy days for both of us when Sophie and me began to travel in the cart. I at once give her the name Sophie, to put her ever towards me in the attitude of my own daughter. We soon made out to begin to understand one another through the goodness of the heavens, when she knowed that I meant true and kind by her. In a very little time she was wonderful fond of me. You have no idea what it is to have anybody wonderful fond of you, unless you have been got down and rolled upon by the lonely feelings that I have mentioned as having once got the better of me. You'd have laughed, or the reverse, it's according to your disposition, if you could have seen me trying to teach Sophie. At first I was helped, you'd never guess by what. Milestones. I got some large alphabets in a box, all the letters separate on bits of bone, and saying we was going to Windsor. I give her those letters in that order, and then at every milestone I showed her those same letters in that same order again, and pointed towards the abode of royalty. Another time I give her cart, and then chalked the same upon the cart. Another time I give her Dr. Marigold, and hung a corresponding inscription outside my waistcoat. People that met us might stare a bit and laugh, but what did I care if she caught the idea? She caught it after long patience and trouble, and then we did begin to get on swimmingly, I believe you. At first she was a little given to consider me the cart, and the cart the abode of royalty, but that soon wore off. We had our signs too, and they were hundreds in number. Sometimes she would sit looking at me and considering hard how to communicate with me about something fresh, how to ask me what she wanted explained, and then she was, or I thought she was, what does it signify, so like my child with those years added to her, that I half believed it was herself, trying to tell me where she had been to up in the skies, and what she had seen since that unhappy night when she flied away. She had a pretty face, and now that there was no one to drag at her bright dark hair, and it was all in order, there was a something touching in her looks that made the cart most peaceful and most quiet, though not at all melancholy. The way she learnt to understand any look of mine was truly surprising. When I sold of a night, she would sit in the cart unseen by them outside, and would give an eager look into my eyes when I looked in, and would hand me straight the precise article or articles I wanted. And then she would clap her hands and laugh for joy. And as for me, seeing her so bright, and remembering what she was when I first lighted on her, starved and beaten and ragged, leaning asleep against the muddy cart wheel, it gave me such heart that I gained a greater height of reputation than ever, and I put Pickleson down by the name of Mim's travelling giant, otherwise Pickleson, for a fupun note in my will. This happiness went on in the cart till she was 16-year-old, by which time I began to feel not satisfied that I had done my whole duty by her, and to consider that she ought to have better teaching than I could give her. It drew a many tears on both sides when I commenced explaining my views to her. But what's right is right, and you can't neither by tears nor laughter do away with its character. So I took her hand in mine, and I went with her one day to the deaf and dumb establishment in London, and when the gentleman come to speak to us, I says to him, "Now I'll tell you what I'll do with you, sir. I am nothing but a cheap-jack, but of late years I have laid by for a rainy day notwithstanding. This is my only daughter, adopted, and you can't produce a deafer nor a dumber. Teach her the most that can be taught her in the shortest separation that can be named, state the figure for it, and I am game to put the money down. I won't bate you a single farthing, sir, but I'll put money down here and now, and I'll thankfully throw you in £1 to take it. There." The gentleman smiled, and then, "Well, well," says he, "I must first know what she has learned already. How do you communicate with her?" Then I showed him, and she wrote in printed writing many names of things, and so forth, and we held some sprightly conversation, Sophie and me, about a little story in a book which the gentleman showed her, and which she was able to read. "This is most extraordinary," says the gentleman. "Is it possible that you have been her only teacher?" "I have been her only teacher, sir," I says, "besides herself." "Then," says the gentleman, and more acceptable words was never spoke to me, "you're a clever fellow, and a good fellow." This he makes known to Sophie, who kisses his hands, claps her own, and laughs and cries upon it. We saw the gentleman 4 times in all, and when he took down my name and asked how in the world it ever chanced to be Doctor, it come out that he was own nephew by the sister's side, if you'll believe me, to the very doctor that I was called after. This made our footing still easier, and he says to me, "Now, Marigold, tell me what more do you want your adopted daughter to know?" "I want her, sir, to be cut off from the world as little as can be, considering her deprivations, and therefore to be able to read whatever is wrote with perfect ease and pleasure." "My good fellow," urges the gentleman, opening his eyes wide, "why, I can't do that myself." I took his joke and gave him a laugh, knowing by experience how flat you fall without it, and I mended my words accordingly. "What do you mean to do with her afterwards?" asks the gentleman with a sort of a doubtful eye. "To take her about the country?" "In the cart, sir, but only in the cart. She will live a private life, you understand, in the cart. I should never think of bringing her infirmities before the public. I wouldn't make a show of her for any money." The gentleman nodded and seemed to approve. "Well," says he, "can you part with her for 2 years?" "To do her that good, yes, sir." "There's another question," says the gentleman, looking towards her. "Can she part with you for 2 years?" I don't know that it was a harder matter of itself, for the other was hard enough to me, but it was harder to get over. However, she was pacified to it at last, and the separation betwixt us was settled. How it cut up both of us when it took place, and when I left her at the door in the dark of an evening, I don't tell. But I know this, remembering that night, I shall never pass that same establishment without a heartache and a swelling in the throat. And I couldn't put you up the best of lots inside of it with my usual spirit. No, not even the gun, nor the pair of spectacles, for £500 reward from the Secretary of State for the Home Department, and throw in the honor of putting my legs under his mahogany afterwards. Still, the loneliness that followed in the cart was not the old loneliness, because there was a term put to it, however long to look forward to, and because I could think, when I was anyways down, that she belonged to me, and I belonged to her. Always planning for her coming back, I bought in a few months' time another cart, and what do you think I planned to do with it? I'll tell you. I planned to fit it up with shelves and books for her reading, and to have a seat in it where I could sit and see her read, and think that I had been her first teacher. Not hurrying over the job, I had the fittings knocked together in contriving ways under my own inspection, and here was her bed in a berth with curtains, and there was her reading table, and here was her writing desk, and elsewhere was her books in rows upon rows, pictures and no pictures, bindings and no bindings, gilt-edged and plain, just as I could pick 'em up for her in lots, up and down the country, north and south and west and east. Winds liked best and winds liked least, here and there and gone astray, over the hills and far away. And when I had got together pretty well as many books as the cart would neatly hold, a new scheme come into my head, which, as it turned out, kept my time and attention a good deal employed, and helped me over the 2 years' style. Without being of an avaricious temper, I like to be the owner of things. I shouldn't wish, for instance, to go partners with yourself in the Cheap Jack cart. It's not that I mistrust you, but that I'd rather know it was mine. Similarly, very likely you'd rather know it was yours. Well, a kind of jealousy began to creep into my mind when I reflected that all those books would have been read by other people long before they was read by her. It seemed to take away from her being the owner of 'em like. In this way, the question got into my head, couldn't I have a book new made express for her, which she should be the first to read? It pleased me, that thought did, and as I never was a man to let a thought sleep, you must wake up all the whole family of thoughts you've got and burn their nightcaps, or you won't do in the Cheap Jack line. I set to work at it. Considering that I was in the habit of changing so much about the country, and that I should have to find out a literary character here to make a deal with, and another literary character there to make a deal with, as opportunities presented, I hit on the plan that this same book should be a general miscellaneous lot, like the razors, flat iron, chronometer watch, dinner plates, rolling pin, and looking-glass, and shouldn't be offered as a single individual article like the spectacles or the gun. When I had come to that conclusion, I come to another, which shall likewise be yours. Often had I regretted that she never had heard me on the footboard, and that she never could hear me. It ain't that I am vain, but that you don't like to put your own light under a bushel. What's the worth of your reputation if you can't convey the reason for it to the person you most wish to value it? Now I'll put it to you. Is it worth 6 pence? 5 pence? 4 pence? 3 pence? 2 pence? A penny? A halfpenny? A farthing? No, it ain't. Not worth a farthing. Very well, then. My conclusion was that I would begin her book with some account of myself, so that, through reading a specimen or two of me on the footboard, she might form an idea of my merits there. I was aware that I couldn't do myself justice. A man can't write his eye, at least I don't know how to, nor yet can a man write his voice, nor the rate of his talk, nor the quickness of his action, nor his general spicy way. But he can write his turns of speech when he is a public speaker, and indeed I have heard that he very often does before he speaks 'em. Well, having formed that resolution, then come the question of a name. How did I hammer that hot iron into shape? This way. The most difficult explanation I had ever had with her was, how I come to be called doctor, and yet was no doctor. After all, I felt that I had failed of getting it correctly into her mind with my utmost pains. But trusting to her improvement in the 2 years, I thought that I might trust to her understanding it when she should come to read it as put down by my own hand. Then I thought I would try a joke with her and watch how it took, by which of itself I might fully judge of her understanding it. We had first discovered the mistake we had dropped into, through her having asked me to prescribe for her when she had supposed me to be a doctor in a medical point of view. So thinks I, now if I give this book the name of my prescriptions, and if she catches the idea that my only prescriptions are for her amusement and interest, to make her laugh in a pleasant way, or to make her cry in a pleasant way, it will be a delightful proof to both of us that we have got over our difficulty. It fell out to absolute perfection. For when she saw the book, as I had it got up, the printed and pressed book, lying on her desk in her cart, and saw the title, Dr. Marigould's Prescriptions, she looked at me for a moment with astonishment, then fluttered the leaves, then broke out laughing in the charmingest way, then felt her pulse and shook her head, then turned the pages pretending to read them most attentive, then kissed the book to me, and put it to her bosom with both her hands. I never was better pleased in all my life. But let me not anticipate. I take that expression out of a lot of romances I bought for her. I never opened a single one of them, and I have opened many, but I found the romancer saying, let me not anticipate. Which being so, I wonder why he did anticipate, or who asked him to it. Let me not, I say, anticipate. This same book took up all my spare time. It was no play to get the other articles together in the general miscellaneous lot, but when it come to my own article, there, I couldn't have believed the blotting, nor yet the buckling to at it, nor the patience over it, which again is like the footboard. The public have no idea. At last it was done, and the 2 years' time was gone after all the other time before it, and where it's all gone to, who knows? The new cart was finished, yellow outside, relieved with vermilion and brass fittings. The old horse was put in it, a new one, and a boy being laid on for the cheap jack cart. And I cleaned myself up to go and fetch her. Bright cold weather it was, cart chimneys smoking, carts pitched private on a piece of waste ground over at Wandsworth, where you may see him from the Southwestern Railway when not upon the road. Look out of the right-hand window going down. Marigold, says the gentleman, giving his hand hearty, I am very glad to see you. Yet I have my doubts, sir, says I, if you can be half as glad to see me as I am to see you. The time has appeared so long, has it, Marigold? I won't say that, sir, considering its real length, but what a start, my good fellow. Ah, I should think it was. Grown such a woman, so pretty, so intelligent, so expressive. I knew then that she must be really like my child, or I could never have known her standing quiet by the door. You are affected, says the gentleman in a kindly manner. I feel, sir, says I, that I am but a rough chap in a sleeved waistcoat. I feel, says the gentleman, that it was you who raised her from misery and degradation and brought her into communication with her kind. But why do we converse alone together when we can converse so well with her? Address her in your own way. I am such a rough chap in a sleeved waistcoat, sir, says I, and she is such a graceful woman, and she stands so quiet at the door. Try if she moves at the old sign, says the gentleman. They had got it up together o' purpose to please me. For when I give her the old sign, she rushed to my feet and dropped upon her knees, holding up her hands to me with pouring tears of love and joy. And when I took her hands and lifted her, she clasped me around the neck and lay there. And I don't know what a fool I didn't make of myself, until we all three settled down into talking without sound, as if there was a something soft and pleasant spread over the whole world for us. So every item of my plan was crowned with success. Our reunited life was more than all that we had looked forward to. Content and joy went with us as the wheels of the two carts went round, and the same stopped with us when the 2 carts stopped. I was as pleased and as proud as a pug dog with his muzzle blackleaded for an evening party and his tail extra curled by machinery. But I had left something out of my calculations. Now, what had I left out? To help you to guess, I'll say a figure. Come, make a guess and guess right. Not? No. 9? No. 8? No. 7? No. 6? No. 5? No. 4? No. 3? No. 2? No. 1? No. Now I'll tell you what I'll do with you. I'll say it's another sort of figure altogether. There. Why then, says you, it's a mortal figure. No, nor yet a mortal figure. By such means you got yourself penned into a corner, and you can't help guessing an immortal figure. That's about it. Why didn't you say so sooner? Yes, it was a immortal figure that I had altogether left out of my calculations. Neither man's nor woman's, but a child's. Girls or boys? Boys. Aye, says the sparrow with my bow and arrow. Now you have got it. We were down at Lancaster, and I had done 2 nights more than fair average business, though I cannot in honour recommend them as a quick audience in the open square there, near the end of the street where Mr. Sly's King's Arms and Royal Hotel stands. Mim's travelling giant, otherwise Pickleson, happened at the self-same time to be trying it on in the town. The genteel lay was adopted with him. No hint of a van. Green baize alcove leading up to Pickleson in a auction room. Printed poster. Free list suspended, with the exception of that proud boast of an enlightened country, a free press. Schools admitted by private arrangement. Nothing to raise a blush in the cheek of youth or shock the most fastidious. Mim swearing most horrible and terrific in a pink calico pay place at the slackness of the public. Serious handbill in the shops, importing that it was all but impossible to come to a right understanding of the history of David without seeing Pickleson. I went to the auction room in question, and I found it entirely empty of everything but echoes and mouldiness, with the single exception of Pickleson on a piece of red drugget. This suited my purpose, as I wanted a private and confidential word with him, which was, Pickleson, owing much happiness to you, I put you in my will for a fapun note. But, to save trouble, here's 4 puntin down, which may equally suit your views, and let us so conclude the transaction. Pickleson, who up to that remark had had the dejected appearance of a long Roman rushlight that couldn't anyhow get lighted, brightened up at his top extremity, and made his acknowledgments in a way which, for him, was parliamentary eloquence. He likewise did add that, having ceased to draw as a Roman, Mim had made proposals for his going in as a converted Indian giant, worked upon the dairyman's daughter. This Pickleson, having no acquaintance with the tract named after that young woman, and not being willing to couple gag with his serious views, had declined to do, thereby leading to words and the total stoppage of the unfortunate young man's beer, all of which, during the whole of the interview, was confirmed by the ferocious growling of Mim down below in the pay-place, which shook the giant like a leaf. But what was to the present point in the remarks of the travelling giant, otherwise Pickleson, was this: Dr. Marigold, I give his words without a hope of conveying their feebleness. Who is the strange young man that hangs about your carts? The strange young man, I gives him back, thinking that he meant her, and his languid circulation had dropped a syllable. Doctor, he returns, with a pathos calculated to draw a tear from even a manly eye, I am weak, but not so weak yet as that I don't know my words. I repeat them, doctor. The strange young man. It then appeared that Pickleson, being forced to stretch his legs, not that they wanted it, only at times when he couldn't be seen for nothing, to wit in the dead of the night and towards daybreak, had twice seen hanging about my carts, in that same town of Lancaster, where I had been only 2 nights, this same unknown young man. It put me rather out of sorts. What it meant as to particulars, I no more foreboded then than you forebode now, but it put me rather out of sorts. Howsoever, I made light of it to Pickleson, and I took leave of Pickleson, advising him to spend his legacy in getting up his stamina, and to continue to stand by his religion. Towards morning, I kept a look-out for the strange young man, and, what was more, I saw the strange young man. He was well-dressed and well-looking. He loitered very nigh my carts, watching them like as if he was taking care of them, and soon after daybreak turned and went away. I sent a hail after him, but he never started or looked around or took to the smallest notice. We left Lancaster within an hour or 2, on our way towards Carlisle. Next morning, at daybreak, I looked out again for the strange young man. I did not see him, but next morning I looked out again, and there he was once more. I sent another hail after him, but as before he gave not the slightest sign of being anyways disturbed. This put a thought into my head. Acting on it, I watched him in different manners, and at different times, not necessary to enter into, till I found that this strange young man was deaf and dumb. The discovery turned me over, because I knew that a part of that establishment where she had been was allotted to young men, some of them well off, and I thought to myself, if she favors him, where am I? And where is all that I have worked and planned for? Hoping, I must confess to the selfishness, that she might not favor him, I set myself to find out. At last, I was by accident present at a meeting between them in the open air, looking on, leaning behind a fir tree without their knowing of it. It was a moving meeting for all the 3 parties concerned. I knew every syllable that passed between them as well as they did. I listened with my eyes, which had come to be as quick and true with deaf and dumb conversation as my ears with the talk of my people that can speak. He was a going out to China as clerk in a merchant's house, which his father had been before him. He was in circumstances to keep a wife, and he wanted her to marry him and go along with him. She persisted. No. He asked if she didn't love him. Yes, she loved him dearly, dearly, but she could never disappoint her beloved, good, noble, generous, and I don't know what all, father, meaning me, the cheap jack in the sleeved waistcoat, and she would stay with him, heaven bless him, though it was to break her heart. Then she cried most bitterly, and that made up my mind. While my mind had been in an unsettled state about her favoring this young man, I had felt that unreasonable towards Pickleson, that it was well for him he had got his legacy down, for I often thought, if it hadn't been for this same weak-minded giant, I might never have come to trouble my head and vex my soul about the young man. But once that I knew she loved him, once that I had seen her weep for him, it was a different thing. I made it right in my mind with Pickleson on that spot, and I shook myself together to do what was right by all. She had left the young man by that time, for it took a few minutes to get me thoroughly well shook together, and the young man was leaning against another of the fir trees, of which there was a cluster, with his face upon his arm. I touched him on the back. Looking up and seeing me, he says, in our deaf and dumb talk, "Do not be angry." "I am not angry, good boy. I am your friend. Come with me." I left him at the foot of the steps of the library cart, and I went up alone. She was drying her eyes. "You have been crying, my dear." "Yes, father." "Why?" "A headache." "Not a headache?" "I said a headache, father." "Dr. Marigold must prescribe for that headache." She took up the book of my prescriptions and held it up with a forced smile. But seeing me keep still and look earnest, she softly laid it down again, and her eyes were very attentive. "The prescription is not there, Sophie." "Where is it?" "Here, my dear." I brought her young husband in, and I put her hand in his, and my only farther words to both of them were these: "Dr. Marigold's last prescription, to be taken for life." After which I bolted. When the wedding came off, I mounted a coat, blue and bright buttons, for the first and last time in all my days, and I give Sophie away with my own hand. There were only us three and the gentleman who had had charge of her for those 2 years. I give the wedding dinner of 4 in the library cart. Pigeon pie, a leg of pickled pork, a pair of fowls, and suitable garden stuff, the best of drinks. I give them a speech, and the gentlemen give us a speech, and all our jokes told, and the whole went off like a skyrocket. In the course of the entertainment, I explained to Sophie that I should keep the library cart as my living cart when not upon the road, and that I should keep all her books for her just as they stood, till she come back to claim them. So she went to China with her young husband, and it was a parting sorrowful and heavy. And I got the boy I had another service. And so, as of old, when my child and wife were gone, I went plodding along alone, with my whip over my shoulder, at the old horse's head. Sophie wrote me many letters, and I wrote her many letters. About the end of the first year, she sent me one in an unsteady hand. "Dearest father, not a week ago, I had a darling little daughter, but I am so well that they let me write these words to you. Dearest and best father, I hope my child may not be deaf and dumb, but I do not yet know." When I wrote back, I hinted the question, but as Sophie never answered that question, I felt it to be a sad one, and I never repeated it. For a long time our letters were regular, but then they got irregular, through Sophie's husband being moved to another station, and through my being always on the move. But we were in one another's thoughts. I was equally sure, letters or no letters. 5 years, odd months, had gone since Sophie went away. I was still the king of the cheapjacks, and at a greater height of popularity than ever. I had had a first-rate autumn of it, and on the 23rd of December, 1864, I found myself at Uxbridge, Middlesex, clean sold out. So I jogged up to London with the old horse, light and easy, to have my Christmas Eve and Christmas Day alone by the fire in the library cart, and then to buy a regular new stock of goods all round, to sell 'em again and get the money. I am a neat hand at cookery, and I'll tell you what I knocked up for my Christmas Eve dinner in the library cart. I knocked up a beefsteak pudding for one, with 2 kidneys, a dozen oysters, and a couple of mushrooms thrown in. It's a pudding to put a man in good humour with everything, except the 2 bottom buttons of a waistcoat. Having relished that pudding and cleared away, I turned the lamp low and sat down by the light of the fire, watching it as it shone upon the backs of Sophie's books. Sophie's books so brought Sophie's self that I saw her touching face quite plainly before I dropped off dozing by the fire. This may be a reason why Sophie, with her deaf and dumb child in her arms, seemed to stand silent by me all through my nap. I was on the road, off the road, in all sorts of places, north and south, and west and east. Winds liked best, and winds liked least. Here and there, and gone astray, over the hills, and far away. And still she stood silent by me, with her silent child in her arms. Even when I woke with a start, she seemed to vanish, as if she had stood by me in that very place only a single instant before. I had started at a real sound, and the sound was on the steps of the cart. It was the light, hurried tread of a child, coming clambering up. That tread of a child had once been so familiar to me that for half a moment I believed I was a-going to see a little ghost. But the touch of a real child was laid upon the outer handle of the door, and the handle turned, and the door opened a little way, and a real child peeped in. A bright, little comely girl, with large, dark eyes. Looking full at me, the tiny creature took off her mite of a straw hat, and a quantity of dark curls fell about her face. Then she opened her lips and said in a pretty voice, "Grandfather!" "Ah, my God!" I cries out. "She can speak." "Yes, dear grandfather, and I am to ask you whether there was ever anyone that I remind you of." In a moment, Sophie was round my neck, as well as the child, and her husband was a-wringing my hand with his face hid, and we all had to shake ourselves together before we could get over it. And when we did begin to get over it, and I saw the pretty child a-talking, pleased and quick and eager and busy to her mother, in the signs that I had first taught her mother, the happy and yet pitying tears fell rolling down my face.